History buffs, what were the best NES games? That's a tough question, and we'd like to answer it, but the NES had a ton of great releases, and it's really difficult to narrow them down to just a handful without unfairly overlooking dozens of other greats. The NES era was a time of change and transition for video games, and the console's library truly reflected that. The games that showed up at the end of its lifetime were considerably different than the ones we saw in its early days. Rather than pit the older games that helped establish the system in its formative days alongside the mature software that appeared after the system had already been established, we've broken the NES's lifetime into several different eras so as to compare apples with apples. To begin with, let's look at the early days. The games that appeared in the first 2 years of the NES's life, beginning with its American release at the end of 1985 through the 1987 holiday season. It all began here. Castlevania. One of the first truly great third-party releases for NES, Castlevania offered quite a contrast to the cartoon whimsy of Nintendo's own games. Its murky gothic visuals and intense soundtrack matched perfectly to the challenging but cunningly designed action that sent players through 6 stages of a haunted castle as part of protagonist Simon's quest to put an end to Dracula's curse. A world-class franchise kicked off right here. The Goonies II. From Konami, the people who brought you Castlevania, came this unusual but excellent take on the classic kids flick by Richard Donner and Steven Spielberg. The Goonies 2 wasn't simply an unusually good licensed game, it also demonstrated the growing maturity of NES game designers. Where the original Japan-only Goonies had been a fairly straightforward 6-stage platformer, the Goonies 2 borrowed liberally from Metroid, turning the Fratelli gang's hideout into a sprawling non-linear fortress full of traps, dragons, and mermaids. A liberal interpretation of the movie, but still a good one. The Legend of Zelda. Designer Shigeru Miyamoto drew on his own childhood experiences exploring the hills and woods when creating the vast, imaginative world of Hyrule. In the process, he helped foster a fondness for discovery in millions of other children. A grand adventure made all the more desirable by its stylish golden packaging, The Legend of Zelda brought the depth and sophistication of PC role-playing games to the NES, yet presented the adventure with the breezy accessibility and 2-button action of console games. Mega Man. Along with Castlevania, Mega Man helped define the NES as a system that thrived on the strength of great third-party content. An arcade-quality platform shooter enhanced with an expansive free-form level selection feature that added variety and replayability for home play, Mega Man was like nothing else on the system, and helped establish developer Capcom as a key player of the NES era. It also reinforced that classic adage about not being able to judge a book by its cover. Metroid. Nintendo's Metroid straddled a middle ground between the pure action of Super Mario Bros. And the more exploratory approach of Zelda, giving players a world every bit as non-linear as Zelda's, but presented through the lens of a side-scrolling action game. Though often inscrutable and unfriendly, Metroid's sheer ambition helped make up for its design flaws, and it laid down the groundwork for Super Metroid, which alone makes it one of the greatest things ever. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! The arcade Punch-Out was a technological tour de force boasting jaw-dropping graphics and memorable voice work. The NES couldn't hope to reproduce that experience exactly, so Nintendo reinvented the game into something even better. Featuring huge expressive characters thanks to a special chip unique to this cartridge, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out turned boxing into something almost like a rhythm game, good enough to be worth playing even after Nintendo's licensing deal lapsed and Tyson was replaced by the less intriguing Mr. Dream. Rygar. Like Punch-Out, Rygar represents one of the first instances of an arcade game being almost completely remade from the ground up to better fit the NES, something that would become a trademark for the system. Aside from the fundamental concept of a dude with a shield on a chain running in front of a sunset, very little about NES Rygar resembles the coin-op original. Instead, it operates on a hub world system with rudimentary RPG mechanics. It's not faithful exactly, but it's pretty great nevertheless. Section Z. Oh, hey! It's another arcade game whose NES version barely resembles the original release. How about that? Section Z began life as a simple and fairly unremarkable corridor shooter, but on NES it turned into an immense quest through a space labyrinth that almost felt like Metroid as an auto-scrolling shoot-'em-up. By breaking the world into dozens of separate corridors with a choice of 2 different paths at the end of each one, Capcom turned a straightforward action title into a complex adventure. Solomon's Key. By way of contrast to games like Rygar and Section Z, Solomon's Key converted an arcade puzzle platformer to NES without radically reworking its fundamental premise. Taking control of a tiny adventurer traveling through a complex maze of puzzles, players have to master a limited tool set of skills in order to evade or destroy monsters while working their way to the exit. No easy task, but an enjoyable one. Super Mario Bros. And finally, how can we not give a nod to the game that put the NES on the map in the first place? Before Super Mario Bros., Nintendo's home console was just a nice machine with some decent titles. Mario revolutionized gaming and elevated NES to a must-have gaming powerhouse. With 32 levels full of secrets, precision controls, and world-class level design, Super Mario Bros. Is as good today as it was back in 1985. For more qualitative judgments about old video games, keep watching and reading usgamer.net.